Matthew 26, verses 55 and 56. In that hour, Jesus said to the crowd, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this has all taken place that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. Today is the Sunday that is known as Easter Sunday. Well, technically, according to the calendar, it is the Sunday that Jesus himself would have risen up from the dead because it's the Sunday right after Passover. And this makes sense. And there's so many different ways of looking at this story. And I want us to see today that Jesus is King. Now, last week, we actually kind of looked at this story that took place the week before Jesus was crucified. And that is whenever Jesus rides in to Jerusalem on a donkey. Now, he did that in order to fulfill prophecy. But you know, that prophecy, it stated that your king comes to you. Now, that's what we saw in Matthew chapter 21. So now we're going to fast forward to the very time of his betrayal and whenever he is going to be crucified and he is going to be buried and he's going to raise up from the dead. We're going to look at kind of all of those things together, but especially looking at this idea about how Jesus is the king and so many different ways that is shown throughout the story. Matthew definitely focuses on that, and some of the other gospels do as well. But let's take a look at Matthew's gospel this time. In Matthew chapter 26, we see that Jesus is already arrested by this point. They are trying to find some reason to be able to get rid of him. They don't like what he is saying. The way that I kind of look at this is, these people, they are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And they look at Jesus, and instead of doing better themselves, what they do is they look at Jesus and they try to find a way to tear him down. In this case, they are really looking for ways of arresting him and doing away with him for good. They are looking for false evidence against Jesus. And really, if anything, I think that this passage right here, it testifies to how good the law of Moses actually is. Because during Jesus' day, the chief priest and the whole Sanhedrin, they were looking for false evidence against Jesus. They were looking for people who were going to lie. And even whenever they had people come up to the stand, they couldn't have them agree on anything. Remember, it's part of the law of Moses that you have to have 2 or 3 witnesses. They couldn't even get that at all. So then finally they start questioning Jesus himself, and at first Jesus remains silent. But then finally Jesus opens his mouth, and it was by choice. But notice what Jesus said. In Matthew chapter 26, beginning in verse 63 and going to verse 66. The high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." "You have said so," Jesus replied. "But I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" "He is worthy of death," they answered. The Jews totally want him dead. And as we look at this, this could be a little confusing to us because, we see what Jesus said and we're like, how does this have to do with blasphemy? Okay? The word blasphemy has to do with speaking against God. So how did Jesus' statement in verse 64, how is that speaking against God? Well, he's actually quoting from one of the prophets, from Daniel chapter 7. And whenever you start looking at Daniel chapter 7, it's a very kind of odd passage because you see that God the Father is definitely the one who's sitting on the throne, and he's called the Ancient of Days. And, he is this old one who is up there on this throne. And then you start to see that there's this Son of Man. Daniel sees this in this vision. There's a Son of Man. That means a human being who ascends up there and starts to sit next to God the Father. And it's a little confusing because even within that passage, you see that man is even worshipped. Now, the big thing with that and Jews is if you're a Jew, you're not supposed to worship anyone or anything except God alone. Why do you have in the scriptures, in the book of Daniel, why do you have a passage about a son of man, a human being being worshipped? It's kind of confusing. It's kind of odd. But what Jesus is saying is that he himself, he is that Son of Man who is going to be sitting at the right hand of the mighty one, the ancient one. And he's the one who's going to be coming on the clouds of heaven. Everything about what Jesus said is raising himself up to a level that they were not comfortable with him being at. And if Jesus were simply a human being, just like anyone else, we shouldn't be worshiping him either. But that's where Jesus is different. Because Jesus is not just a human being. He is that. But he's also the Son of God. He is God in the flesh, the Word that became flesh. So whenever they ask him, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God, he says that he is. But the way that he answers is a passage that he is even telling them that he is worthy of worship. That's why they say that he's spoken blasphemy, because they don't think that he is worthy of worship at all. The Jews, they want him dead. And what they do at this point is they hand him over to the Romans. This is how it goes for Rome. In Matthew chapter 27, we're kind of picking up just a little bit more in verses 11 through 14. We start to see that Jesus, he stands before the governor. The governor's name is Pilate right here. And Pilate simply just asks him, he says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus' response this time is, "You have said so." He's trying to tell them, look, he's not even the one that is making all these statements right here. He's just saying, look, you already know the reality of it. So Pilate, he doesn't want to have really anything to do with this. He's trying to just get Jesus just away from him. And what he ends up doing is he finally just gives in to the will of what the people want. They're wanting him dead. So what he's going to start to do is he hands him over to these Roman soldiers and all. So the Romans continue to kind of question him, or rather, at this point, they're not just questioning him. They start to mock him. This is what they do. In Matthew 27, beginning in verse 27, then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him. They took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. See, each one of these items, they are fit for a king. But every single one of them is done in such a mocking way. Such cruelty, such evil, really. Here in verse 28, we see that they put a scarlet robe. Scarlet would be this color of royalty. They put this scarlet robe on him. It's a nice one, most likely. By all indications, it's a nice robe. Here in verse 29, we see that they take a crown and they put it on his head. But instead of a crown that's fit for a king, it's a crown of thorns. And they put a staff in his hand. That staff is that sign of the king. He is the one that's in charge. He is the one that's different. They put that in his right hand. And they kneel in front of him, just like you would to a king. You would give him honor, give him praise. But they are doing it mocking him. And in a mocking way, they say, "Hail, King of the Jews." Now remember, these people aren't Jewish. They don't care about all this stuff. They are making fun of the Jewish people. They're making fun of the King of the Jews, so to speak. But yet, when they do all this, interestingly enough, they are in a way saying that he is king. Little do they know that he is not just a king, but he is the King of kings. They put a robe on him. They put a crown on him. They give him a staff. It represents that power. And they kneel and they say, "Hail, King of the Jews." But sadly, this is all done in a mocking way. But the mockery is not done. In verses 35 through 37, we read that whenever they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots, and sitting down they kept watch over him there. Above his head they placed the written charge against him, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Sometimes whenever you see pictures of Jesus being crucified, you'll see above the cross that there's this sign. Well, yes, there was this sign. And a lot of times the sign, it consists of 4 different letters. And, you might look at that and you're like, well, what do those letters have anything to do with him? Well, it has to do with this translation of it. But it represents that sign that this is Jesus. He is the King of the Jews. And that sign was placed above his head. So he had all those other elements that we looked at in the last slide. He is called the King of the Jews. Like, this is supposed to be the charge, this written charge against him. This is what it's supposed to be. This is what he is guilty of doing, is he is the king of the Jews. Once again, little do they know everything that they are doing is actually true. He really is the king of the Jews, but not just the king of the Jews. He is the king above all kings. Jesus, he is that king, but he willingly went to the cross right here. Now, all of this is this, this story of this wickedness, this evil that they were putting to death this innocent man. But whenever you look at it, this was part of God's plan. This was part of the plan that Jesus knew was all along part of the plan. Because of our sin, we deserve death. But Jesus steps in our place, and he sacrificed his life on our behalf. But he is the King of Jews. He is the all-powerful one. And because of that, death itself is not going to hold him forever. But here as he's hanging on the cross, they still continue to mock him. In verses 45 and 46, we also start to see that there are these different signs that start to happen. From noon until 3, so he stays for a long time on this cross, several hours. But there was this darkness that came over the land. Now, interestingly enough, this, for those of you who kind of like some science or astronomy, paying attention to things, it's kind of neat that right now you've got this whole rocket. We've got, astronauts and everything that they're going to be going around the moon and back again at this time. But this time of the year, the moon is actually a full moon. And yes, it would have been a full moon during this time too, because it was around Passover. So Passover, because of the time that it falls, it's whenever the moon would be full. So when the moon is full, that means it's got all the light on it, which means you can't have a solar eclipse. See, sometimes people look at this and they're like, oh, well, this is just an eclipse. No, it's not an eclipse. It couldn't be an eclipse. You can't have a solar eclipse during Passover, during a full moon. It's impossible. Something else is going on here. This is signaling that this innocent man is dying. And whenever Jesus is hanging on the cross, he even cries out to God and he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, I do not believe that he is really stating that God has forsaken him. I believe that what he is doing is quoting from Psalm 22. And if you open up your Bible and if you look at Psalm 22, we're not going to do that today, but if you open up your Bible and look at Psalm 22, you will see that psalm starts off with the psalmist feeling like he is forsaken by God, but at the end of it, he's praising God and he's saying, more people are going to follow God, and he's going to continue to promote what God has been doing and proclaim what God has been doing. I believe that psalm has a lot to do with what is happening at the foot of the cross. But you can check that out on your own. It's Psalm 22. In verses 50 through 53 of Matthew 27, and when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. All of these, once again, are so many different signs. There's so much that is happening that it gets your attention. Now, one of the things that I want to pay close attention to, not so much the things in verses 51 through 53, but look at verse 50 with me. He gave up his spirit. See, Jesus freely gave up his spirit. It was always his choice. He was in control. He chose to die at this very moment. And whenever he died and around his death, there were so many signs before, so many signs after. It got people's attention. That's why we see this. In verse 54, we see when the centurion and those who were with him, who were guarding Jesus, saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, surely he was the Son of God. See, it's the centurion and these guards, all these people, they even proclaim, as far as we know, they have no reason to have anything to do with Jesus, really. It's just they've been given these orders to put him to death. Okay, so that's what they're doing. But here, they start to realize this man's death is different. He's not just a common criminal. He was the Son of God. But he's already dead. What do you do at this moment? Well, Joseph of Arimathea. This is not Jesus' father. This is a different Joseph, Joseph of Arimathea. We read in verses 57 through 60 that Joseph had become a disciple of Jesus, And he asks for Jesus' body, and he places it in his own new tomb. He gives him this proper burial. It was very nice what Joseph did right here. But Jesus didn't stay in that tomb for long. In Matthew 28, verse 1, after the Sabbath at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were as white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. So on the first day of the week, we start to see that this is not an ordinary death, right? On the very first day of the week, the angel who just has made this, very amazing appearance right here, he has something to announce. Verses 5 through 10, the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, he is risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you." So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." So here, the statement that the angel says to the women is that Jesus, he is not here. He is risen. He's not in that tomb. He is already risen, just like he said he was. And they even invite him. They say, "Look, come and see. Check these things out, and then go and tell." That's a pretty good statement, for us as well, right? For us to come and see and to, experience these things and to learn these stories. But then after we know these stories and after we know the truth, we have a responsibility to go and to proclaim this message. The women were the first ones who on this Sunday morning right here, they have this task to go and tell this message that Jesus is risen. He is the King of Kings. By him rising up from the dead, he has shown that he has power over death. If he has power over death, what do you think could possibly have power over him? The answer is, of course, nothing. And the next passage, the way that Matthew ends his gospel, is talking about all this authority that Jesus has. It's what we call the Great Commission. So verses 16 through 20, then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." So the reason that I wanted us to see this is how Matthew ends his gospel. He ends it with these disciples right here, that they are worshiping him in verse 17. And Jesus makes the statement that all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. He is the King of Kings. Yes, they only mockingly, accepted him as such around his death. But he was that king. He is that king. He is the one who has all authority. He is the one who has all power. He is the one who has conquered death, and he has told us that if we will follow him, if we will do, what he's asked right here, he tells them to go make disciples, to baptize those disciples, and to continue to teach them everything that Jesus taught them, and that he was going to be with them the whole time. Guess what? I'm pretty sure that means he's still with us today. He still is helping us. He is the one who has all this authority, and he gave us this task to proclaim this message. This is the same message that we are still proclaiming today. The tomb was empty because the King of Kings rose from the dead. He conquered death, and he has promised to do the same for us as well in the future, if we follow him, if we're faithful to him and obey the things that he has commanded us.